Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here with Robbie from CMSPI. We did a presentation in MRC Amsterdam on the main stage about AI. And I had so many of the attendees come to me and say, oh my gosh, I wish I could share this internally with my teams. Robbie and I were talking and we're like, you know what? Let's just go ahead and record it. And so this is the kickoff of the agentic commerce, kind of the state of where things are today. And when Robbie and I were brainstorming, you can see on the screen behind us the browser wars of the early 90s and 2000s. And Robbie had made the comment to me, we're right back where we were a long time ago. So Robbie, why don't you tee things off?
Yeah, absolutely. And pleasure to talk about this topic with you, as always. I mean, the browser wars, everyone's familiar with it because we've lived through it. Like you've seen the primary browser go from, I think it was Mosaic back in the day, then Internet Explorer had its time, then Firefox coming in, Chrome, and sort of now Chrome pretty dominantly, but we've got Safari in there and a number of others. And I think the key point of this is to maybe hammer home a point that we'll probably make quite a lot during this, which is the way that things are set up now and the winners today are not necessarily the winners of tomorrow. And it could literally be tomorrow when it comes to AI progress. So um, we think that there's a reemergence of this browser wars phenomenon when it comes to the platforms people are using. There's so many players that have a lot of power in their various markets that anybody could win. So I probably will make some predictions about who that will be, but I doubt they're going to be correct because there's going to be someone else that comes in and just absolutely blows away the competition.
Yeah, I remember in the early days of the browser wars, nobody had ever heard of Google. And if you asked who was going to be the winner, Netscape was the cool kid on the block. So, and I mentioned it to my kids and like, what's Netscape? So it was like, oh, wow. But anyways, I actually love to measure things. And so one of the things I went out and did is took a look at how many active users a day are actually using all of these AI platforms. And consumer behavior has truly materially changed. We now have 122 million active consumers a day using ChatGPT. And Gemini has 35 million, DeepSeek's 22 million, and you can see the rest of the numbers here, totaling about 187 million a day. And what blows my mind is 187 million consumers have changed their behavior in this is really since about March is when things really started to move and shift to the AI platforms. And that's a pretty big change in consumer behavior. Usually consumer behavior takes decades to change. And it's ranging the gamut from my mom writing poems for her friends for their birthdays to my son using it as a tutor for help with his math. So it's all age groups and it seems to be all different areas. And what's really interesting is we haven't seen really the emerging players come out and wow us yet. So I'm definitely keeping an eye on what Amazon, Apple, and Meta are up to as well. But to put in comparison, the 187 million a day, 1.5 billion consumers use Google search every day. So it's still not mainstream like replacing it. And in fact, when Robbie and I were chatting, we talked about crossing the chasm, the old model, and Robbie and I are certainly the innovators. We're probably one of the very few people in the world who are, anytime something comes out agentic, we're placing crazy orders. And we move into the visionary stage, and then you cross the chasm into where it becomes a product. And we're kind of here in this early adopter stage right now. We're right around 12%ish. And so, Robbie, why don't you take us through what you think it's going to take to cross that chasm?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't remember for the life of me who said this to me in the past, but it's the best way I've heard this explained is that for consumer adoption to really take hold, for you to get that critical mass where all of a sudden this is the dominant way of doing things, what you have to create is something that's either 10 times easier, 10 times cheaper, or 10 times better than the previous way of doing things. And in payments, we know a lot about that because it could be said that cards are 10 times easier to use than cash. Maybe mobile wallets are 10 times better to use than cards. And maybe this agentic commerce piece is going to be 10 times easier for customers as well, although the jury's still out on that. And I've got enough San Diego Padres baseball caps in my house now to just to be able to evidence the fact that it's still great, but I don't think the experience is quite 10 times better for the consumer today. So I have no doubt that that chasm will be crossed, but we're going to have to see a bit of innovation when it comes to the actual commerce part of things before we see this thing really become a significant channel. But one thing that you'd mentioned in our previous discussions as well is that that's for commerce. But if you already look at loads of other elements of where AI is improving things for people, we already have this like 10 times better phenomenon happening in a ton of other areas of day-to-day life.
Yeah, no, and in fact, AI is solving so many different things at once from a technologist perspective, just trying to keep up. It's a little bit overwhelming. But, I played with some of the programming tools and had AI write some code, and it's pretty spectacular, right? I can just write a sentence and it spits out the code for an HTML page. And what it doesn't necessarily do is every once in a while it gets a little confused and overwrite your code or put some other features in there you don't want. So I don't know if it's 10 times easier, cheaper, better, but I know a lot of programmers have fully leaned in and are embracing it, and it definitely is making them far more productive. For graphics design, using it to create images and graphics, it works really cool. Still a little bit funky on some of the images, but for the most part, it's good enough. So we're seeing a transition there. Editing and writing, I know every day I use it to edit my content, and lots of different people are using it to write content as well. The entertainment aspect of AI is endless, right? I have it tell me dad jokes every day, pretty much. And then the travel sites are now using it basically to create that virtual travel agent. Booking.com has done a fantastic job of that. And just general task acceleration, and also with the language translations and predicting what people are going to say. So there's lots of different use cases, but you still have to be willing to do a little bit of goofing around and tolerating errors and crashes and random outputs. So we're not there yet, but there's so many areas, and this is just a short list. There's so many more. So we're on our way to get to that whole product you talked about, Robbie, but we're not there yet.
That's it. Yeah, we're pretty confident that it's gonna change the way that we do things because it already is. But yeah, at the moment, it's funded a little bit by our curiosity in actually testing this stuff, I guess. And I mean, one of the reasons that I think we are so interested in researching what this is going to do is the fact that there are detractors that will say LLMs are just text predictors and autocomplete, I guess, or like fancy autocomplete. But in a field that is quite sophisticated, in the field of medicine in general, I mean, there's been a number of studies in a number of fields, but this one in particular, we actually have AI systems that are more accurate when it comes to diagnosing illnesses than human doctors. And before we had things like the Model Context Protocol, MCP, where LLMs can have access to real-time databases and sort of append their own knowledge with real-time updates from industry, which is what a doctor is doing all the time, is reading new studies, understanding new medicine, new treatment. That was one thing previously that was an issue. But you do have these AI systems that are getting this this piece more accurate. Now, the problem is that even though the systems are more accurate, is that there's still that unease, the uncanny valley when it comes to trust of human-like things. And this, like, the closer we get to something looking like and acting like a human, the more nervous we become. I had that experience when I was getting my first Waymo ride, when it pulled up and had my name on the top of it, and just stepping into this thing that has nobody in it. I think it's a very human response to feel that this is strange. And I think that where that comes from is the lack of accountability, which in the autonomous vehicle space is still an issue that rumbles on, even though we've had these things for a good number of years now in actual practice, but many, many more in terms of testing. It's very tricky to assign accountability when a machine gets something wrong, because is it the actual vehicle itself? Well, what are you going to do to a Waymo? What are you going to do to an AI system that's making a purchase for you? Um, is it the company that owns that model? Well, possibly, but it's tricky to bring them into the current system. Is it the customer themselves because they signed away their rights to having any claim against issues with a quick click of the terms and conditions? I think there's an inherent unease when it comes to these AI pieces where we worry about who we are going to be able to punish when it comes time for something to go wrong. And this is a big part of the debate, I guess, about AI, particularly when it comes to commerce, and it's actually touching our money, our funds, and making purchasing for us. That's a hurdle we're going to need to overcome as an industry in order for consumers to be comfortable making purchases through this new channel.
Yeah, no, and when I look at this chart about the doctors, and I just read earlier this year, China opened a hospital with about 40 AI doctors. Um, it's kind of scary. It's like if you get misdiagnosed, you can go back to your doctor and be really upset, and they'll have compassion. And AI is not gonna have compassion. And if it does something illegal, AI doesn't go to jail. Who
That's
does,
it.
right?
That's it. You can't send ChatGPT to jail, and that, as outlandish as that claim is, we do just we like to know that there is consequence to mistakes and bad actions and all the rest, and that just is not something that is a priority for these AI companies at the moment.
Yeah. And when you were talking about the Waymo and even looking at this chart, the one thing that really struck me is, AI is safer or more accurate than a human. And yet we're still more comfortable with a human. So are we just being naive, right? So one of the things that you and I were talking about is the know your agent, right? I've coined it the standard wars. So every time I read the AI press releases, there's another standard coming out of how we're gonna do know your agent. And the thing that I really wonder about is, does it really matter? All these different companies releasing it. I kind of feel like consumer behavior, whichever platform or browser the consumer ends up on, that is going to be who's going to decide what agent framework we use. So right now, OpenAI is clearly in the lead based on where the numbers are. And so as people are studying and looking at things, that's definitely one to keep an eye on. Fraud is going to happen, I think, also before the funding and the prioritization for building out Know Your Agent happens. And it's really just history repeating itself. Back in the early days, we could see data breaches happening and credit card numbers being stolen off of websites, and people were storing them in the clear. But until a whole bunch of financial loss happened and PCI evolved and you had to encrypt credit card numbers and that became a rule, we had to have a lot of losses first. So, there's this KYA. We have to have some losses, I think, before it happens. And there's a lot of other things. SEO was the way most merchants got traffic until Google search turned on AI. And then overnight, 37% of that traffic, the click-through traffic for SEO, went away. And so now merchants are focused on how to get the AI EO. And also, how do we flag agent-initiated transactions, and how do we handle human present versus human not present? And there's a lot to go figure out.
Yeah. And these are things that obviously, have been worked on for decades when it comes to payments. And we have this feature, this channel that looks exactly like all the bad stuff that we were trying to block previously when it came to malicious bots. And now we need to actually distinguish between intent of these bots. And that's what a lot of the standards and protocols are aiming to do. This is a known issue. We need to figure out when a bot is acting in the interests of the consumer. We need to figure out, what limits and restrictions that consumer originally put on that transaction so that we don't get an avalanche of chargebacks coming back as well. And I do unfortunately also ascribe to that same idea, Julie, that we're going to have very bad fraud. And I hope it comes sooner rather than later. Genuinely, I hope that it happens to you and me, because if it doesn't and it comes later down the line, there's a gigantic problem, and that's, a massive impact on the economy and far more people. So there is a lot of money on the line for whoever wins the AI wars and creates that model. If we do get to AGI, artificial general intelligence, and all the rest, or even if we just get really, really good LLMs, yeah, something's going to happen with a serious negative financial impact before we start to see some regulation in this space. And so for merchants, I guess it's super important now that in lieu of that regulation, you look at and understand, okay, this is an agent that is attempting to search on my site or conduct a purchase on behalf of one of my customers. Even if you don't know what to do with that now, just figure out when it's happening, and then we'll hopefully get some guidance from some folks that are far smarter than me working on this stuff to be able to know what we do in response to it.
Yeah, now before we jump to the next slide, I did want to share my favorite statistic around traffic. So 37% of all internet traffic is bad malicious bots. So when you think about it, that's like over a third of the traffic flying around is bad, but 51% of all internet traffic is actually bots now. So there's more bot traffic than human traffic. And so when you're thinking about that, I think you did a great job of summarizing all the different agent protocols that are happening. So if you could walk us through that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is, as I said, as a merchant, you need to know what you're being hit with, and you need to be able to distinguish these things. So there's a lot of very clever people and companies working on figuring out how they get agents to identify themselves, knock on the door, ring the doorbell, what they say in order to introduce themselves. Hi, I'm coming from ChatGPT. My customer has told me XYZ, and I'd like to see what products you have. There's maybe a slightly more polite version of what actually goes on there, but that's essentially, that's one element of what the protocols are looking to achieve. And if we split agentic commerce, which I think is a bit of a catch-all for just everything agentic as it relates to people buying stuff, you're probably looking at three separate parts of this. One, which is the agentic search, which is what most people are doing today. It's coming up to the holiday period. I am looking for gift inspiration for my family and friends when I head back to Scotland later on. And I am searching for various items, and ChatGPT helps me to do that and organize thoughts. So that's one part of it, and that's already happening today. Loads of people are using this for the search function. There's then the second piece, which is the actual commerce, and that is an agent speaking to the merchant's site or the merchant's agent, whatever they have, to introduce the customer's agent at the door. And that's more about like, okay, what products are available? What payment methods are available for this transaction? How am I actually going to make that purchase? And then there is the actual payment function, which is, okay, I'm going to click pay now, and I have these credentials, and I am autofilling, or I am using a virtual card, or whatever it might be. And the point of going through each of those stages is to say that when you look at the protocols, they each have different elements of that. MCP, the Model Context Protocol, is more for that first stage, the search side of things, maybe a little bit of the commerce side as well. That's about figuring out how agents can speak to APIs and additional data sets and databases and get that real-time updated information into the model rather than just being a static set of data that it's trained on that necessarily is in the past. So that's more about like plumbing we've got there. You know, these are the pipes. This is how you speak to each other as an agent. Whereas Google's AP2, the Agent Payments Protocol, does a number of things, but one of the cool things that I think it does is it standardizes the intent mandate of the customer as well as the cart mandate. So this is basically a universal language where agents are able to say, my consumer roughly said, here is what I want to make a purchase of, and basically distilling down maybe a full chat log into Taylor Swift tickets, maximum $500 for these dates in this location. And really trying to capture that consumer intent, which when we start talking about liability and chargebacks is going to be a really important element of that. And then there's a number of other protocols. There's protocols from the card networks themselves. There's protocols that focus specifically on that middle commerce part of that interaction, which is the OpenAI and Stripe one, the ACP. But fundamentally, you know, there is no designated way of doing things in this space. The whole industry is trying to figure out ways of solving some of those challenges we spoke about previously. And the response is, well, let's all standardize to a particular protocol. And what we're going to see is some combination of the current protocols and many more rising to the surface as being, this is the best way to get a payment successful from a consumer's original intent to the actual payment piece of this whole chain. And yeah, is a very important element, again, for merchants to identify, because you need to know when an agent's hitting your website, and you need to know which of these protocols it's using so that you can best surface your products, engage with that agent, and not lose what might be one of your highest intent purchasers of all time. So super important to understand, at least high level at this stage. There's a lot of developer docs to read through.
Yeah, and what I'm most excited is at least people are thinking about it. So we're heading in the right direction. And then the other swag that you did, or not swag, analysis, is all the different kinds of payment flows. So there's lots of different ways you can make agentic purchases today. So could you walk us through that as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is the piece that is most relevant for MRC members, for people in payments and fraud. It's interesting and important to be across that search side of things, more so on the commerce side of things as well. But agentic payment is something that is happening today, but not at the scale that generally the discussion about agentic commerce would have you believe. So it's important to know the different types of payment that are happening in order to figure out, how do we respond to this? Is this a problem, or is this actually just fine as a payments professional? So we have maybe the most basic of the payment options available to agents today, which is the autofill. This is, you know, you've provided your information up front to the agent, which brings about questions about PCI compliance, among many other things. But fundamentally, this agent knows your information and is going to autofill it for you on the site, which already happens today with, well, probably everyone's devices, whether it's Apple, Google, otherwise. So this is not too different from what's happening today. I mean, it's helping accelerate through a lot of time maybe that the customer would spend typing in their details, but I guess it's pretty similar to just saving card details for later. So as a payment fraud professional, this is sort of irrelevant. It's not a problem. It is super relevant, but it's not so much of a problem. You can continue doing the same things you do today. Something slightly different is the likes of Perplexity, which is what we're coining in lieu of any other terms and definitions and a nice glossary for this stuff as a staged agent, in the same way that a staged wallet exists in the payments world. So what's happening with Perplexity is they are the merchant of record. They are taking payment from the customer's payment method, their card at the moment, and are spinning up a virtual card that has a normal bin range and normal interchange categories and all the rest. But Perplexity are ultimately paying the merchant here, and that does a couple of good things. It allows Perplexity primarily to make purchases on pretty much any site in the world. And so there's a good consumer use case for that. As a merchant, what that means is that you are potentially losing a lot of customer information because you're no longer seeing Joe Smith bin 402222. With this particular card type, you're seeing Perplexity with their particular bin range, and that just becomes a Perplexity transaction for you. It does also happen to be a purchasing card, which has a higher interchange category than a number of consumer payment methods as well. So some interesting implications there, in the same way that a lot of, say, like alternative card payment methods like Cash App or buy now pay later like Afterpay or Klarna, you're sort of similar loss of customer information there.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's different is that because it's the merchant of record, the merchant doesn't necessarily have customer information now. So as far as refunds, returns, chargebacks, all that stuff gets way more complicated. It basically breaks the flow. And so when we were talking about this as we first discovered it a couple months ago, all of the payment folks and fraud folks were holding their heads going, oh gosh, this is hard because I can't predict fraud because I don't have all the customer details. And how do I handle returns? And all of the marketing people are going, this is so cool. How do I make sure my product is front and center when the consumer says, so I bought a bunch of gray baskets off of Perplexity, right? So how do I make sure my gray basket's at the top of the screen over all the other merchants? And so it's always the battle of the marketing side working with the payment and fraud side. So it really creates a lot of challenges.
Exactly correct. And I think then we sort of move to the complete flip or the opposite example of the pass-through agent, which is the ChatGPT current model of I have a GPT Pro subscription, my card details are already saved, and my card details are going to be passed through to the merchant essentially directly. There's a bit of tokenization going on there, but fundamentally similar sort of information as you would receive today for a transaction of this nature. And what that does mean is that the merchant has to be partnered with ChatGPT at the moment in order for this to work through ACP, the protocol. But what it also means is that for a payment and fraud professional, you have this retained visibility of the customer that, exactly as you said, Julie, helps you with fraud prevention and detection. It also potentially still allows you to route transactions. So from a cost element, you still retain some of that control. But then you still do have that marketing angle where you're actually going to have to partner with ChatGPT here, and there may be some additional costs involved with that. So we're seeing this as the kind of two main divergent models at the moment, and there's a big discrepancy in terms of amount of data you receive for that transaction, the cost of that transaction on average, the fraud and sort of chargeback liability for this as well. Loads of payment performance impacts to this particular decision. So it's interesting watching which merchants back which horse when it comes to these two models. But again, as we said with the browser wars, probably not going to be these two models that are top of the pile in a few years' time. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
Yeah, no, and I do think that a lot of merchants will be implementing lots of different platforms, seeing what works and what sticks and what doesn't, and looking at what some of the acquirers are doing. They're almost becoming AI integration orchestrators, right? So it'll be interesting to see where we head.
That's it. Yeah. And very quickly, finally, the opportunity for these platforms to become their own wallets. There's no reason that they wouldn't or couldn't. And you could easily see, I can imagine a future where I'm getting paid my salary into a GPT wallet. I'm not particularly fond of that reality, but I can definitely see it being the case and then using a GPT coin to make purchases. It's very possible that the current ecosystem gets sort of disintermediated by these platforms, particularly if they have enough scale to be able to make these decisions. So look out for that. But for today, stage agents, pass-through agents, and autofill are the main things for payment and fraud teams to be concerned with at the moment.
Yeah. And so one of the things when Robbie and I were talking about this is I said, how has your job changed before AI versus now?
Yeah. And I guess the same thing I keep coming back to is one of the folks from NVIDIA coined this, I think, but LLMs today are very good at minimizing human toil, TOIL. Like, this sort of hard work that takes a lot of brain power, but isn't massively productive. Think of things like taking notes or consolidating those notes or, summarizing a 200-page report that someone's produced or a piece of regulation. Now, not saying you can condense that all down to sort of 10-second intervals. You still need to go and look at the actual source document and all the rest. But fundamentally, that's hard stuff that, requires a lot of brain power. And for me, what's happened is my ability to turn those tasks into faster processes then means that I have more time to think about the future of AI, which changes every day, and I need to change my opinion on every day as well. So from that perspective, it's been a big help in reducing those sorts of administrative tasks and then being able to focus on strategy. But I am starting now, even since we last spoke about this topic, to move more into your thinking on this piece, Julie, about, yeah, that's good until all of a sudden all of your job is the really hard stuff.
Yeah, so what I shared with Robbie is my job is 10 times more intense. All of the easy work has disappeared out of my queue. I've outsourced it or pushed it all onto AI. And it exhausts me. So, I start my day around, 4 or 5 in the morning. And, usually I'm good at least till 2 or 3 in the afternoon. But now, because everything I'm doing is very, very much requiring a lot of brain power, I'm finding I have to take a pretty good break at like 10 a.m. And one of the tools I use is a tool called Fixer for my email, Fyxer, and it actually goes through and says, this is an urgent email. You're going to have to read it and take action on it, and it color codes it red. It says this is something that's more FYI, but you have to take a look at it, and it color codes it yellow. And it moves a whole bunch of my email to a box that I summarize once a week. It preps me for my meetings. So ahead of my meetings, it'll actually say, hey, this is the last conversation you had with this person, and here's the action items from the last meeting. So it preps me. So all that stuff where I used to like go dink around and do some prep and stuff, I don't do any of that anymore. And so I don't know if this is good or not, right? My productivity is higher. I am doing more valuable kinds of work that can't easily be done by anybody else. But are we gonna overtax ourselves? And that's when Robbie tossed out this really fascinating and terrifying statistic.
Yeah, and I I I I sort of use this to justify a lot of things that I see these days, and it makes a huge amount of sense to me now that I know this. So the amount of information that we're subjected to every day, and this is like on our phones, laptops, working, TV, radio, whatever else, just the amount of data and information we're subjected to is about 74 gigabytes per day. There's a particular study, if anyone's really interested, that said in 2008 it was 34 gigabytes a day, and we've had information inflation of about 5% per annum ever since. And that's a lot of information for us to be seeing and, well, in lots of cases, not necessarily taking in fully. Um, and 500 years ago, that is the amount of information that somebody would be subjected to in their entire lifetime. And these are, very clever people like Copernicus, the heliocentric model, Francis Bacon, Galileo a little bit later as well. Like it's I mean, it's a good amount of information, by the way, that they're able to, get out of books and scrolls and all the rest. But the point being that there's so much information available and so much money spent trying to grab our eyeballs, basically, when it comes to phones and apps and all the rest. That you know, AI and LLMs are almost the antidote to this. In my view, is that it's impossible for a human brain to be able to ingest this data. Another one I won't get too much into is that the actual cognitive power of the brain is about 10 bits per second. That's a tiny amount of information. And we simply just are not built to be able to process all of this 74 gigabytes all the time. So people find their little corner, like 100 megabytes a day of that 74 gigs that they want to focus on. And I think what a lot of VCs and just otherwise investing is banking on is that a lot of this information will be able to be distilled by AI models so that we can make better decisions and better, more productive time from the work that we do. And that's a big bet. But certainly the problem is there is too much information that every human brain is being subjected to. How do we reduce that down and focus on the important stuff? Maybe that's for LLMs to be that first barrier and make us all productive. But that's certainly what the stock market thinks, or the stock market's betting on. We shall see if that's the way that it shakes out.
Yeah, and along those lines, we talked about AI and what we're learning and what we're working on. And I've always said, as a company, you have to innovate or die. So these are a bunch of brands that maybe didn't choose the path to innovate. Blockbuster, you used to go and check out a video and bring it home, and Netflix, quickly jumped the gun. The camera companies, Polaroid and Kodiak, had the opportunity to do digital, but they chose not to do digital because they made more money with the print, and then they're no longer because digital took over. So one of the things that I use AI for is every week I sit down on Sunday night and I say, hey, make the list for what we're going to eat, 2 meals a day, and then I check the local grocery store to see what's on sale and create the meal plan, and it gives me the meal plan. We prep for an hour on Sunday night. No meal takes more than like 20 minutes to prep. And there's 2 people eating every day, and it bought what was on sale. So then I have an agent load all the products into my shopping cart at the grocery store. So all I have to do is curbside pickup. And we're this close to having that just be automated. So right now I have a nice, really big, long prompt to do all that, but it's made my life significantly easier and better. A neighbor down the street called me, and she was, oh my gosh, I've just got assigned snack mom for the soccer game, and there's 3 soccer games I've got to cover, and each one's got to have a theme. And she was kind of having that mom freak out moment. I said, come over. We sat down in Chat GPT. I said, the snacks have this criteria. Here's the food allergies. It needs to be shelf stable. She wants to buy everything at Target. We typed it in, it printed out the list, came up with really cute themes. And she said, okay, now how do I click order from Target? Because we said shop it all at Target. And so that's not quite there yet, but we're this close. So if you as a company are not at a minimum researching, but also testing and playing around, you could end up being one of these companies. I was surprised this last fall as we were at conferences. Some companies were telling me, "Oh, we're playing wait and see to what happens with AI." And I even had a couple people in the last week tell me AI is a fad. So I don't think so. But I really do think that you do have to innovate or die.
It's the same thing as the dot-com bubble, isn't it? I think there's a appreciation that probably there's a bit of excess money that's floating around, a valuation in this thing. But out of the dot-com bubble, once it burst, I mean, anyone that bet on Amazon, if I don't know, Microsoft had taken a position in that small tech retailer startup at the time out of someone's garage, then yeah, they would have been a massive winner of this. There are going to be big winners, and again, to the browser wars piece, we don't know who those are going to be, but this is even if a lot of the rhetoric around sort of share prices is that there's a bit of a bubble, it might be overvalued a little bit, whether that's right or wrong, by the way. Um, it doesn't really matter because the tech is real. It is here and it's doing things that are more productive than previous. So it will be used. And I mean, there's enough discussion in the press with press releases from basically every major company that you can be pretty certain that this is going to be how the world progresses. And just in terms of learning about this stuff, exactly to your point, Julie, I don't think there's anything better you could do than actually try it for yourself. It's not difficult to go into ChatGPT and write up a little prompt for this sort of thing. Plenty of tutorials that can take you through doing that. You don't necessarily need to get a subscription, but if you do, you can try out the agentic purchase and end up with 17 baseball caps and a couple of 6-key keyboards in your house. I don't even know what they're for, but I've got them. And you can go on Perplexity, whatever. But just I would strongly encourage that there's an opportunity here to really learn about a super exciting new way that we're all going to be doing a lot of things in the future, even if it doesn't fulfill all of its promise. It's still, you have to be trying this out. And I guess the same thing goes for individuals as it does for companies. Like you need to be testing this because there is no better time than now to get into all the sandboxes that are available for the different protocols. And a lot of AI companies that I'm sure would be more than happy to partner and test something out at this very early stage where everybody's trying to find that killer use case, particularly when it comes to this commerce specific element of agents.
Yeah, and when we were chatting, one of the comments you made to me was that AI was pretty evolutionary, and I actually I paused and I thought about it, and I don't disagree with that, but I do really believe robots plus AI will absolutely be revolutionary. And when we think about what is the world going to look like in 2030, even today, right now, you can go into Kura. And they have sushi waiters that deliver the drinks. There's a picture there. Pepper is a robot bank teller that is live, and Pepper can open mortgages, help you check your balance, and provide you information about a car loan and such. Grubhub has food delivery robots, and then there's a couple other companies as well. And you'll see them driving around all by themselves, delivering food in downtown areas. And then Amazon drone delivery, absolutely fascinating to me. I've done a couple of those now, and just seeing this giant drone just drop a package in your backyard is like 2 hours after you order it is pretty cool. Very loud, but pretty cool. So, I think that we will see a lot of innovation as the robots get better and better.
Yeah, that's it. And I only say it's evolutionary. And by the way, that's still a really good thing because it's sort of accelerating a lot of these things that would just take us so much time to do manually, like that party planning or gift organizing or travel and trip planning as well. These are all things that we do today if it's possible and we have enough time and it's worthwhile doing it. And if it's not, then we just don't do it. So what AI unlocks is that ability for some of these things that maybe were too costly for us to do in the past now to happen. And so that will be the sort of new elements of it. But in the same way that I mentioned, the human brain's sort of cognitive data processing is about 10 bits per second. The sensory processing, like touching, feeling stuff and smelling and seeing and all the rest, that's about 1 million bits a second of data that we're able to process. I see that very much as that is the difference between AI and robots is that AI is the cognitive, the thinking, and then the robots is the actual sensing. And yeah, that's where we're going to see things really, really change when it comes to a number of areas, some of which mentioned here, but also like elderly care. You mentioned hospitals as well.
Yeah.
This is the space where that really changes things when an AI is able to actually understand its surroundings and cause and effect of doing something. That's the sort of thing that LLMs are missing today. They know what words are correct, and they know that Michael Jordan was a basketball player, but they don't know really what that means, and they don't know what it is to play basketball, even if they can speak about it very fluently. So
They can fake it really, really good. Just this weekend I said, "Hey, I'm ready to plant the fall garden." And I have a long-standing relationship now with ChatGPT. And I said, "So what should I plant?" And it said, "Well, Julie, you live in Austin, Texas, and so these are the crops that'll grow well. And I think in addition to planting spinach and lettuce, it also said you should plant a pepper plant because you're kind of feisty." So it made a little joke because it knows I love humor. And I just looked at that and I paused and I was like, this is funny. I like it. It makes me feel good, right? Oh wow, it's tailoring to me and I don't have to give it a bunch of details. And in some ways, like the privacy hat that I wear, I'm like, oh my gosh, it knows so much about me and it knows how to make me laugh and make those endorphins go. And it's like, wow, that's really terrifying.
that's it. Yeah, exactly. And this is sort of to bring it back a little bit to payments. This is the responsibility we all have when it comes to our loved ones and friends that are using these things because um, scams and social engineering is a gigantic problem. And other than folks like Aaron West of Project Shamrock, very few people actually speaking about it, certainly at a government level. But this technology is really cool for consumers. As a consumer, as a good consumer, I like to think, this is exciting stuff to enhance all of our lives. But as a fraudster hat on, this stuff is incredible. This is exactly what we've been waiting for. I no longer have to spend years learning how to code and be technically elite when it comes to trying to exploit weaknesses in merchant websites and practices and processes and payment processes. I've got a tool at my fingertips that can code that up for me if I really want, might be able to execute it. I think the ChatGPT fraud version is literally called Fraud GPT, if I'm not mistaken,
It
on the
is.
dark web, available for purchase. I think it's also a subscription model.
It is.
These things are fun to think about from the consumer perspective, but in our space of the world, I think we have a massive responsibility to both personally sort of educate, people around you about this stuff and how it can, have spectacular deep fakes of your kid saying, "Hey, I've lost my phone. I need $500 right now," or, "I'm not going to be able to get this train on my travels around Southeast Asia." Like these are the sorts of things that play on the emotional heartstrings that are far easier to do now. And it's going to be a societal effort. And maybe going back to your point about a big load of fraud to happen to really wake people up to this. We got to be careful with the technology when it comes to our space, managing and protecting people's hard-earned money at the end of the day, even though also, we want to accept it for commerce related purposes. It is about protecting people's money and preventing them from being scammed. So it will be very interesting to see how it pans out and maybe what regulation we do or don't get when it comes to this space. But it's going to change things for sure. I think we can say with certainty.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you, Robbie, for repeating this presentation that we did in Amsterdam so we could share it to a wider group. And if anybody has any questions, our contact details will be in the post for this video, and we're always happy to chat. And I hope to see everyone at some of our MRC events coming up. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, Julie.